to you, and this is certainly a very interesting development over the last 24 hours.
Absolutely. John's joining us on the 84 Lumber Project Professionals Newsline. The idea of those that would question the free report, not necessarily brand new. We just had on Penn Staters for Responsible Stewardship a couple of moments ago in the last segment. You've been challenging what the free report has been declaring as well. What do you make of the report that was put out by former U.S. Attorney General Dick Thornburgh?
Well, first of all, just so your audience remembers, because I've been on with you a couple of times, my part in this story is that I created a website, which is framingpaterno.com, and created a documentary film, which people can see at framingpaterno.com, a mini-movie, which has actually already gotten into a couple of documentary film festivals, including the American Documentary Film Festival in April and here in California. And I've been immersed in this story for really definitely the last 8 months, probably about a year, to be fair. And I think the free report is a complete joke for many of the reasons that Dick Thornburgh outlined, and I thought the report was very well done and very credible. However, I have come to view this, Robert, more, I started thinking about this as a documentary film. I've come to think of this more as a political campaign.
Okay.
I'm involved in a political campaign now, and to put it in political terms, I kind of run the super PAC for the we're unaffiliated with the campaign itself. We do not coordinate, although we certainly have many of the same objectives. And I have a little bit more freedom to go places where the candidate, if you will, the Paterno family, is not able to go. And frankly, I understand the challenges that the Paterno family face here probably better than anybody who is not a member of that family and not part of the Penn State community, because I've been destroyed myself over the last year in all of this. And so I understand the limitations that they have, but everybody has a different objective and is concerned about different pitfalls. And I actually think in general that the report was incredibly measured and really kind of pulled a few punches. And I understand why it did that. I think this is a very, very long fight. I know the Paterno family has the very long view in mind. I mean, we're talking 10, maybe 20 years here to be able to turn this narrative finally around. I mean, heck, people are still fighting over Richard III after his bones got found under a parking lot, and then that history is starting to get revised. So hopefully it's not going to take, multiple centuries.
Well, let me ask you this. What was it, remind people, what was it that got your attention? Because the vast majority of the American people, the vast majority of the media took the free report as it was absolute fact. What was it that caused you to have your doubts?
Well, and to be fair, and I'm for a media guy, I'm pretty humble, but I was the first person that wrote that the free report was a bunch of baloney, and I wrote it the afternoon that the free report came out, and it's why I created framingpaterno.com, and because, first of all, Robert, as a guy who's done several documentary films on the nature of the news media, and you know the way the news media works, I knew that the news media was incredibly vulnerable to buying hook, line, and sinker into this false narrative because it was just too good to be true. They weren't going to challenge this narrative. It's an amazing narrative. It's the downfall of the great Joe Paterno, just like they bought into the Lance Armstrong narrative, just like they bought into the Manti Te'o narrative. I mean, when the media buys in fully to a narrative that doesn't make sense, watch out, because the truth be damned. It makes no difference anymore. So when I read the report, and first of all, you got to remember, he releases a 267-page report at 9 a.m. He holds a press conference at 10 a.m., Robert. I mean, people in the news media don't read to begin with. Most of them can't even read very well, as it is, even if they have more than an hour to read 267 pages. But they're certainly not going to read 267 pages in an hour.
Okay.
And so that was my first alarm bell. Then I read it, and I'm like, he hasn't spoken to any of the people who were directly involved in this. That, to me, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Now, the other thing about this, people have been saying that the Paterno report is not credible because they paid the experts. Well, who paid Louis Freeh $6.5 million? The Board of Trustees at Penn State, who fired Joe Paterno, who desperately needed somebody to back up that firing because they were getting huge blowback from Penn State alumni because of that decision. And then I guess to me the most important thing, and I actually think that the Paterno report is a little weak on this, is the big picture of the free report. The free report accuses Penn State, Spanier, Curley, Schultz, and Paterno of a cover-up. Robert, as you know, this whole story doesn't pass the first test of a cover-up. First of all, within a week, 12 people or more knew about what was going on. Number two, the cover-up got blown by the people allegedly in the cover-up. I mean, Mike McQueary was an employee of Joe Paterno.
Mm-hmm.
His testimony blew up the cover-up, and guess whose testimony somewhat backed up McQueary's testimony? Joe Paterno's. I mean, this has got to be the first cover-up in the history of man where the main witness wasn't involved, the perpetrator wasn't involved, the victim wasn't involved, and by the way, after the indictments, all three people under indictment have not flipped on each other. Where has that ever happened in the history of cover-up?
A fantastic point. You go back to 98. And the claims of a cover-up, and then bring it up to McQueary, and then the continual cover-up. Go back to 98. Even Free says there was nothing done by anyone that's involved in this cover-up to do anything to thwart the investigation whatsoever. Nothing. And then in 2001, when you bring McQueary into the mix, if these three men conspired to cover this up, then McQueary had to have been a part of the conspiracy, but nobody's willing to allege that. Well, what's the point if you and I decide to conspire to do something and leave a key player out? What's the difference what you and I conspire to do?
Well, that's a good point, but it goes even further than that. How come nobody in the media has even raised the question? I ask this everywhere I go, Robert, and not one media person will even answer the question. It's a very simple question for members of the news media. If you answer this, by the way, if you answer this properly, I may give up framingpaterno.com because they're never going to answer this question.
Okay.
Please explain to me why Mike McQueary, in his whistleblower lawsuit against Penn State, is not even alleging that he was forced to be part of a cover-up. That's what a whistleblower lawsuit is about. That would be worth tens of millions of dollars, and the media would back him to the hilt. He's not even alleging that.
Right.
Why? Please explain how that works in a cover-up. It doesn't. And
it's a fantastic point. He's not saying that he was granted a job years later to cover this up. He's not saying that they came to him and he finally said years after the fact, yes, I'll go ahead and take the job now. Nothing even you're absolutely right. Nothing even close to that.
No, and that would be, by the way, even if that wasn't true, you would think he would be alleging that because that would be worth a heck of a lot of money.
Right.
And frankly, his case as it stands now, Robert, is crap. I mean, he has no case if there's a rational. I think he's just expecting that Penn State's going to roll over like they're rolling over for anybody else that claims that they were victimized in this case. So, I mean, look, if you look at the actual narrative, now I will say this is going to surprise some people. I actually think that the report, the Paterno report as it's being called, does something very dangerous with regard to McQueary, and that is that it does not, with very small exceptions, with maybe some inferences, but it does not, in totality, question whether or not what Mike McQueary claims now to have seen ever actually happened. And I think that is very dangerous, one, because I don't think it's consistent with the truth of this matter, and number two, I'm having a difficult time understanding how we get to full exoneration for Joe Paterno under the set of facts that it appears as if the family experts are willing to accept, because it seems to me as if they're banking everything on this was a complete miscommunication. And by the way, miscommunication was a part of what happened here, but it's not all miscommunication. Here's my view of what happened here, Robert. I believe that the most likely scenario is that Mike McQueary saw something between a 1 and a 2 alarm fire. If you think about this in the terms of 5 alarm fires being the worst thing you could see.
Okay.
He sees a 1 or 2 alarm fire. He tells Joe Paterno about a 1 alarm fire. Then 10 years later, over time, McQueary builds this up in his mind as a 3 alarm fire. Prosecutors find out about him. They ask him about him. They twist his arm because they tell him, we got other victims here. You got to help us. So McQueary makes it into a 4 alarm fire, and then the prosecutors in the grand jury testament present they write it as a 5 alarm fire, and the media goes bananas. That, to me, is the scenario that makes sense about what really happened here.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, you agree with that?
Completely, because there's no one that's come forward that said, yes, Mike told me what he saw that night. I mean, nobody, whether it was in the criminal proceedings to validate and substantiate his testimony in the Sandusky trial, because all that came forward was Dr. Drainoff, who made it clear he asked on a number of different times whether or not he saw this or not, and he said no. Oh, by the way, the worst charge in association to McQuarrie's testimony, Jerry Sandusky was found not guilty on. But there's not a friend, not a cousin, not anyone that's coming forward and saying, yes, at some point, Mike McQuarrie told me that he saw the horrible things that he ultimately claims to have seen in the grand jury presentment. Nobody.
And Robert, let me make a very, very important point, because members of the media, see, one of the biggest problems I have in fighting this battle is that the media doesn't even know enough to know what they don't know. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I just got in a battle with a Philadelphia Inquirer reporter, the guy who wrote the top story in the Philadelphia Inquirer today about this, Phil Sheridan. And he thinks that victim 2, the victim in the Mike McQuarrie episode, is, quote, unidentified. Well, that's just not true unless you think that the person currently claiming to be victim number 2 is lying, which, of course, is politically incorrect, and we're not allowed to do that. Victim number 2, the McQuarrie episode victim, did come forward. In fact, I believe he came forward during the grand jury presentment. Jerry Sandusky voicemail messages prove that. The prosecution knew he existed. They did not call him. There's only one reason why they didn't call him, Robert. It's because they didn't like his story. And then he comes forward, victim 2 does, to not just Joe Amendola, but a FBI-trained investigator on 2 separate occasions with his mother and his brother in the room, and says on the record, I was the boy in the shower that Mike McQuarrie saw. Nothing happened. Now that's the victim. Now if that's not relevant here to how this story transpired, I don't know what is. But I would say 99% of media members have no idea what I'm talking about when I say that.
Yeah, because they're concerned about what can we do to spin this into being sensational. How can we get the most attention? How can we get the most views on television or on YouTube or the most web visits? What can we do to really get as much attention for ourselves in the process? And if it means that you go with something that isn't factual, that is being blown tremendously out of proportion, well, if that's what it takes, then that's what we go with. We're just asking questions.
And that's how it started, Robert. But now we're in a situation where lots of people in the media have a vested interest. I mean, they're more invested in this story than the Catholic Church is in Mary's virginity. I mean, they are as invested in this as you can possibly get. And so they're never going to admit they were wrong. I mean, and so now they just build the lie after lie after lie. And the worst part about it, the part that bothers me so much, is the massive laziness and incompetence of these people. It's not just the narcissism and the lack of caring of the truth and being ratings driven and all that. I guess that's part of the game in this day and age in the media. But when you're so lazy that you don't even bother to read a report, and then you claim that it's the Bible in the case of Free, or that it's bunk in the case of the Paterno report. I mean, now we're talking about a major crisis in this country when it comes to our media, Robert. Right. And it's impacting everything. Not just, this goes way beyond Joe Paterno, goes way beyond Penn State. This is about the nature of the information we're getting in this democratic republic that is seemingly teetering on the edge right now. And that's one of the reasons why I created FramingPaterno.com and why I feel so passionately about this issue.
John Ziegler, once again, with FramingPaterno.com. John, great talking to you, my friend.
Hey, Robert, thanks for letting us say the truth. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have yourself a great night. John with us on the 84 Lumber Project Professionals Newsline. I want to get your response to the report coming out and what the family has put forward. I still think that there are a lot of reasons to believe that what we have come to accept as absolute from the Free Report isn't the way that it was. And there are good reasons to have legitimate doubts. And Mike McQuarrie, to me, is the number one reason to have tremendous doubts. And this claim of a conspiracy that there's almost zero evidence at all it existed. And why is it that the media didn't do what they should have done? Examine everything critically. Critically question everything, even the Free Report. Challenge them. Nope. Instead, they chose to regurgitate instead. Pretty sad. 848.
Weekdays 9 to noon.
Honestly, this is a fact.
The Inside Story.
Somebody might be offended.
With Marty Griffin.
The M word. M word.
Marty Griffin. News Radio 1020.
This is where we're at.
KDKA.
The 2013 Barrel Subaru.